Allen's Investigate, airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans. Yay! And welcome to the Allen's Investigate with me, Shona Allen.
And I'm Gary Allen, the Cockney Bard.
We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM from New Orleans, and also on Roku. Now, this week, we'd like to welcome back a very special guest, Ralph Ellis, writer, historian, polymath, and independent researcher of biblical and Egyptian history for more than 40 years. Welcome, Ralph.
Welcome,
hey.
Ralph.
Good to be back on your show. Thanks, Shona, Gary.
Thank you.
You'll note today that I'm Abbott today, so this is my preferred pronoun today.
Oh, okay. Is it them or
he or she or them or they?
It can be anything nowadays. You can choose what you like. So today I'm an Abbott today. Why not? I'm in control of my monastery.
You can be a cat, Ralph, today if you want.
My pronoun is meow.
Yes.
Anyway, this evening we're going to be talking about Mary Magdalene, so I'm really looking forward to this. This should be really interesting.
Yes, because her life might be a little bit different to what people expect, because, of course, they've been given the standard Christian indoctrination from their creed, and it's almost correct, but not quite correct, because she was rather more important than they make out. So, yes, that's the difference. As with all of these people, as we've seen before.
Well, it's been a beautiful week this week. There's plenty of sun, haven't we?
Yes.
Yes, you can see I'm a little bit redder than last week. I've had some sun as well.
Bless you. Well, where shall we begin then, Ralph? Shall we talk about Jesus being a husband of Mary Magdalene, perhaps? Or where would you like to begin with it?
Yes, we could. We could do that. What shall we have a look at? Well, I suppose we could look at the possibility that they were related, which again they will not entertain within classical Christianity. So I think they were brother and sister.
Right.
That she was a sister wife, which was quite normal in those days. Remember, King Agrippa of Judea and Berenike were brother and sister, and they were sort of married. So was Monobazus and Helena, the people from Adiabene, Edessa, that we were talking about in the last show, the show before last. The king and queen of Adiabene, Edessa. They were brother and sister as well. It says so in the works of Josephus. And it's possible that Mary and Jesus were also brother and sister, because Saul, who I conflate with Josephus, was asking for a sister wife. So this comes from 1 Corinthians 9:5. And Saul says, "Have we not the power to lead about a sister wife, as well as the other apostles do, and the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas?" Cephas is Peter. So he's asking for a sister wife. Now, if you read many Bibles, it doesn't say that. So if you read the American Standard or the King James, it'll say a sister and a wife, or a sister in the church, or something like that. They mistranslate it. But if you read the literal Bibles, like the Darby or the Rotherham, that make no effort to explain the text or translate the text, they just take the verbatim from the Greek and give you the direct translation. The Darby and the Rotherham say sister wife. Adelphi Gurney, I think it was, in the Greek. And so it's quite possible that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were brother and sister, because that was fairly normal. All of the pharaohs of Egypt were doing this. Cleopatra married both of her brothers. It's to keep it within the family, and that's what they were doing. So although later on I've amended this, that I think they're probably half sister, half brother, because I think there's too much of a generation gap between the two. So I think Mary Magdalene was much younger from other evidence that we might have a look at. And so I think they must have been half sister, half siblings. But nevertheless closely related, because that's what these royal families did. So that's a sort of interesting introduction. The other thing is, because I don't think we've touched on this, is who she was. We were talking about Jesus of Gamala before, that he was the biblical Jesus. Jesus of Gamala was one of the leaders of the Jewish revolt, who I link in with the Edessan royal family. Well, Jesus of Gamala married Mary Boethus. It says so in the Talmud. And she bought him the high priesthood of the temple for a tarkab of silver, no less, which is, I don't know, it's about 70 kilos of silver. Anyway, it's a lot of silver, in order to buy him the high priesthood. So he became high priest. So Mary Boethus, who Professor Robert Eisenman suggests is Mary Magdalene, she married Jesus of Gamala, who've I already identified with the biblical Jesus. So there we are. There's the two famous characters, Jesus and Mary, were probably married. The problem with that, the problem that the Catholic Church doesn't want to discuss, is that Mary Boethus was the richest woman in the Near East, which rather changes the story somewhat. So according to the Talmud, her dowry when she married Jesus was 1 million gold denarii. Gold coins is the equivalent of about $20 billion today.
Wow.
That's rich. That's
Very
super rich.
It certainly is.
What's that pie?
Yeah, so these were very important aristocrats, and I think part of the royal family of Adiabeni Edessa. And that's why they were influential. That's why people were discussing them. That's why they were involved in this revolt against Rome, etc., etc. So she would have been the daughter of Queen Helena, that we were talking about before, of Adiabeni Edessa, who owned the largest palace in Jerusalem and the largest tomb in Jerusalem. She was the de facto Queen of Judea. This is Queen Helena, the very famous Queen Helena of the 1st century. And therefore, what we're looking at is Mary Boethus being a daughter of, or very closely related to, Mary Boethus was the daughter of Simon Boethus. And what we're saying is that she was Mary Magdalene, who of course lived at the house of Simon, according to the Gospels. They lived in the house of Simon at Bethany. That's where Jesus was anointed with oil. And that's important. We might as well quickly look at that, because that is quite an important aspect of this. So I might as well do a quick screen share. So let's go to present and share a screen. And I want a window, not the entire thing. Let's do that one, share screen. And that should be coming up with a title of a book, hopefully.
Indeed.
Good. So that's Mary Magdalene, Princess of Orange. That's what the book looks like. It's got a slightly different jacket to all of the other ones anyway. I think it's all right. The characters on the front obviously are Jesus and Mary Magdalene. That comes from a chapel up in Scotland. And as you can see, Mary looks like she's sort of pregnant.
She does.
You look at the sash, the way the sash is underneath her stomach there.
Yeah.
It sort of looks like she's pregnant. This is in a chapel up in Scotland. Yes, that's always interesting. That's in the book. So, Mary anointing with oil. So let's have a look for some images of Mary anointing with oil. She is known as that's a modern one. I don't like this one so much. The standard colors for Mary, the two Marys. So if we're looking at Mary the mother, she's blue and white are her standard colors. If we're looking at Mary Magdalene, she's orange and gold, or orange and green, or gold and green. So this is Mary Magdalene, and she always has ginger hair as well. Of course, she's the redhead.
The ginger hair again.
Again, we've looked at that before, but yeah, Mary Magdalene is a redhead, and she's always holding the alabaster jar. So she is the woman with the alabaster jar. I think that was the famous title of a book by Margaret Starbird, I think it was.
Yes.
And that was the oil that she used in order to anoint Jesus. So what does it say? I was just looking for a quote. Can't find it just for the minute. I'll find it in a minute.
Okay.
So anyway, she is always depicted with an alabaster jar, as in this one. So in this image, Mary's on the right because she's in the green and the gold.
Yeah.
And the lady on the left is Martha, her sister. Let me just quickly. So we've got, where does this come from? Probably the best is John. So this is John 12, starts at John 12:1. Mary took a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. That's fairly... There are three different versions of this, so you can look those up. But what was actually happening here? Here's another image of, this is a sort of a rather older image with Mary, and she's got the alabaster jar. And here's another one. You can see the alabaster jar on the left, again in her gold cloak. What was she doing with this alabaster jar? Well, we've just had one of these. We've had the coronation of Charlie Boy, where they are anointed with oil.
Indeed.
And this has been the sacred tradition ever since the time of King Solomon. If you remember at that coronation of King Charles, they were playing in the background Solomon and Nathan, Nathan and something crowned King Solomon, etc., etc., is the music that they were doing it to.
So it's very symbolic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very symbolic that they are following in the footsteps of King Solomon by being anointed with oil. And the anointing means you become the Messiah, you become the Christ, because the Messiah is the anointed one. The Christ is the anointed one. So Charles became Christ Charles, or Charles the Christ, when he was anointed with oil. But of course, Mary Magdalene was doing this in the house of Simon at Bethany. So what was she doing? She was crowning Jesus as the king. That's when he became the Messiah. He became the Christ, meaning the king of the Jews, the king of Judea. So she was anointing him with oil as the king, which implies that she was very royal or priestly, because of course at the Charles's ceremony, it was the high priest that anointed Charles. It was the Archbishop of Canterbury. So in order to be anointing Jesus, she must have been high up in the church. She must have been, well, we know she was the primary disciple. She
Yeah.
was the head of the church, well, second in line to Jesus. So she was a very important character. And this was a very important ceremony. Obviously, they were down at the house of Simon. This was not being done in a royal palace. One expects that the king had died, and you've got to establish your position within the monarchy very quickly. Otherwise, someone's going to take it from you. So there was no time to get to a palace and actually have a formal coronation. So they did it where they were, which is at the house of Simon, which was probably quite palatial anyway, because remember, Simon Boethus was the richest man in the Near East. So yeah, it was probably a large house. But that's what they were doing, and that is played down within the gospel, so you don't know what this is all about. But this was crowning Jesus as the King of the Jews. That's why he was called the King of the Jews, because he was crowned as a royal king. And Mary was a queen. This is actually obviously Mary the mother, this particular picture. Although she's in the wrong uniform. She should be in blue and white, of course, if she is Mary the mother. And she gets to, this again is supposed to be Mary the mother. Although being sort of mother and daughter, they probably inherited the same titles. This comes from Revelations, doesn't it? So this is Mary and the 12 stars. This is Revelations 12:1, which says, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars." That's what this is portraying. This is fairly standard. You'll find this in a lot of cathedrals. And again, here is Mary with the 12 stars around her head and the moon under her feet. This is supposed to be Mary the mother, but of course here she's dressed as Mary Magdalene. So they are confusing the two, probably deliberately. This is how she's supposed to look, because this is Mary the mother. And again, this is Mary the mother with the moon and the stars. This is a sort of romantic, sort of Catholic version of the same thing. And of course, we have the same symbolism. This symbolism comes down through the millennia, and we still have it because it's the primary symbol, of course, of the EU. Has adopted the same symbol.
Interesting, yeah.
It's very interesting, Ralph.
And overtly that was chosen. The designer of the EU flag said he was inspired by the depictions of Mary the Mother. And of course, this doesn't start with Christianity and Mary. It goes back into Greek history because she is Selene. This is Urania. This is the muse Urania from Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And of course, you can see she's dressed because she was the queen of the stars. That's why she has the stars on her head. And she's dressed in the blue and the white, the blue of the sky and the white of the fluffy clouds. She is the queen of heaven. She is Muse Urania. Remember, she has the same name as that queen we were discussing from Edessa, Queen Thea Musa Urania.
Yeah.
She has the same title. She was the Queen of Heaven.
Which interestingly also then goes back to the link with Egypt again, because that was also a title of Isis.
Yes, they are one and the same. Yes, Isis. They were always identified. We can see this by, if I drop down the bottom here to here. These are two images of Mary the Mother, supposedly, and you can see that she's got the star of Jupiter on her cloak.
Yeah.
And that is Jupiter is Aphrodite. which is Astarte, which is Isis, because in Egyptian her name was not Isis, of course. She was never called Isis. Very bad Greek transliteration again. Her name was Ast, from which we get Astarte, Ashtoreth, all sort of references to Isis or Ast. And Mary was always identified as Isis. That's why she wears the star of sorry, did I say Jupiter? Silly boy.
Yes.
Star of Venus on her
Venus.
cloak. Yeah, Venus is Aphrodite.
Which is very interesting, because that brings me to something that we discussed last week, and that the Greeks called Venus Lucifer, meaning light bringer.
Yes. And Jesus was called Lucifer as well. So they have to be very careful when they denigrate Lucifer, because in Revelations, he's called Lucifer as well.
Yeah.
The light
it's very
bringer.
confusing for people. But I must recommend to people, Ralph, that they listen to our previous shows with you on. This is the 4th time. So this is like basically a part 4. And they could catch up with some of the others, because they're very, very interesting.
Yeah, and they set the stage for what we're discussing here. So there's a lot of symbolism that we've looked at before.
Exactly.
And I mean, this symbolism is all over the place. Wherever you look at these religious paintings, they always have symbolism. This is another typical symbol. This is Mary Magdalene, the sort of penitent Magdalene. And of course, she's always holding a skull. If she's not holding a alabaster jar, she's always holding a skull. And so you'll see many of these Mary Magdalenes always holding a skull. And this is
what do you think the purpose of that is? Because I have my own understanding from an esoteric point of view, but what do you think that the skull represents, that she's always depicted with?
Well, if you listen to the Catholic explanation, it's because she's contemplating death. She's the penitent Mary Magdalene. But of course, it's referring to Jesus, because Jesus was crucified at Calvary, which means the skull. Or in the Aramaic, it's Golgotha.
Golgotha, the head.
Yeah, the skull. And it's referring to where Jesus was actually crucified. And so she's holding basically the skull of Jesus. Now in France, they made a bit of a parody on this, as they always do. They sort of a play on words, and they called this a potentate, a jar of the head, potentate in French. But of course, if you say that quickly, it's a potentate.
Potentate, yes.
It's a queen. It means a queen. So it's indicating that Mary Magdalene was a queen. And they do this all the time. I'm just looking at the reference here for the Talmud. So this just goes to show what they do with this, playing with words. These scribes were very they were very pleased with their skills that they had, because remember, as a scribe, not many people could actually write in this sort of era. So this was a very prestigious sort of job to be a scribe, and they loved playing with the words that they could actually write. I suppose they were very proud of their craft, and they were also covering up the names of the people they were talking about. And
they were, I think you would call them craftsmen, wouldn't you?
Yes, crafting their words in particular fashions. And this is what they say about Mary Magdalene, but you would never know really that this was talking about Mary Magdalene. So what does it say? It says, and this they did to Ben Stada in Lydda. Ben Starder is Jesus, by the way. They hung him on the eve of the Passover. Ben Starder was Ben Pandira. Rabbi Hizda said the husband was Starder and the paramour was Pandira, a paramour being a lover, basically. So that's Mary, the mother, was the paramour called Pandira. His father's name was Starder, but his mother was Miriam, a dresser of women's hair. And that sort of doesn't really mean much. That's why we get the hairy Magdalens. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you don't believe me, do you?
We need to bring a razor or something.
So she was called a dresser of women's hair because in Aramaic that is pronounced as Megadala Nesheya, which sounds like Mary Magdalene the Nazarene, which she was. She was a Nazarene, the same as Queen Helena was a Nazarene. So they're making a play on words with her name. Miriam, the dresser of women's hair. Miriam Magdala Nesheya. Miriam, or Mary Magdalene the Nazarene. So unless you know what they're talking about in texts like the Talmud, you've got no idea that they were actually discussing these biblical characters. And for the hairy Magdalene, here's the hairy Magdalene, and she covers her modesty with a hairy body because she is the dresser of ladies' hair. This is where it comes from. And also she is conflated with Mary of Egypt, who was some sort of saint. She was supposed to be a prostitute that became a hermit and became very religious. And quite obviously that's a play on symbolism with the Magdalene as well. Because Mary Magdalene came out of Egypt. All of this family came out of Egypt. Out of Egypt I have called my son.
I was just going to say, do you think the thing to do with the prostitution reference is to do with the Vestal Virgins and the priestesses of the temple?
Yes. So I think that's, yes, exactly where it comes from. So I've probably got a quote here somewhere. Yes, so it comes from the Golden Legend, where it says the priest received and kissed Mary Magdalene, and he made no, this is Mary the mother, sorry. The priest received and kissed Mary, and he made her sit upon the third step of the altar, and the Lord put grace upon her, and she danced with her feet, and all of the house of Israel loved her. Mary was in the temple of the Lord, just as a dove that is nurtured, and she received food from the hands of an angel. So she worked in the temple. This is Mary the mother, from, I think it was the age of 3 years old until she was a teenager. She worked in the temple. So she, yeah, as you said, she was a Vestal Virgin. That's why she was known as a virgin, because she was a Vestal Virgin, one of the priestly girls who worked in the temple. But of course, that doesn't mean she has to stay a virgin. So from the Proto-Evangelium of James, it says that when she was 12 years old, they sold her off. So various men came in and they had a bidding match for who would become the husband of Mary. And she was given to Joseph. Yes. So, yeah, well, that's what they did. You know, this is...
Lord.
There was no love marriage, of course, in those days. You were either sold off by your parents, or in this case, sold off by the temple. So, yes, she was a Vestal Virgin. But she was also rich. We've already seen evidence that she was rich, because she was Mary Boethus, the richest woman in the Near East. But, I mean, this was all known about back in the medieval era after the Crusades, because the Crusades went across, and the first place they went to was Edessa, so they got a lot of this information.
Yeah.
So the Golden Legend says of Mary Magdalene Mary Magdalene had her surname of Magdalo, meaning a castle, and was born of right noble lineage, and her parents, which were descended from the lineage of kings. So it's explicitly saying this, that she
Yeah.
was royal.
Yeah.
And her father was named Cyrus, and her mother was Eucharis, and her brother was Lazarus. So she lived at the house of Simon with Lazarus and Martha, of course. So her brother was Lazarus, and her sister was Martha, and they possessed the castles of Magdalo and Bethany, and also a great part of Jerusalem.
Which is very interesting, because that leads me just briefly on to Rennes-le-Château, because Berenger Saunier, the Catholic priest there, actually built the Magdala Tower. And also, of course, his house itself is Villa Bethania, wasn't it? Villa Bethany. So
yes,
how
and of course, the name Magdalene means the tower. That's why she's associated with towers. And
two twin towers then.
Yeah, well, the tower symbolism has been very important for a long time. That name actually comes out of Egypt. It's an Egyptian term. So a Magdal is a tower in ancient Egyptian language. And then it became the same in Aramaic, meaning the tower. So she was Mary of the Tower. But I don't think this was just any old tower. I think this was a phallic tower. Because we've had this before in the Old Testament, where Makkah, one of the queens of Judea, she was the wife of King Asa, I think. Anyway, Queen Makkah was put away and dethroned, as it were, because she was caught worshipping or venerating an idol. Is what it says in the King James. But of course, that doesn't tell you very much. It's just a very bad translation. If you look at the Vulgate in the Latin, it's a priapus.
Yeah.
And I think you probably know what a priapus is.
Indeed.
A priapus, for people who have not come across it, was a little godlet from in Roman mythology, with an enormous great penis. So she was caught venerating.
Only joking.
Venerating a priapus, a tower, basically. And I think this is what they're talking about, that they had these phallic symbols because the importance of the tower became quite widespread afterwards. We have these round towers all over. Even in Ireland, which is supposed to be, strictly Catholic, they've been building round towers there ever since the 5th century. And these round towers don't have a function. They are said to be bell towers, but some of them don't even have windows at the top. And even the ones that do have very, very small windows, and there's no evidence that they ever contained bells. And then the question has always been, because some of them are attached to monasteries, they're all attached to monasteries or cathedrals, but some of the cathedrals have a bell tower anyway, and then they have a round tower next door to it. It's quite obvious that these are phallic symbols again. So the round towers of Ireland are all phallic symbols. They are representative of the Magdalene in some senses, that they venerated the phallus, the great phallus of who is the husband of Isis?
Osiris.
Osiris. Not sure why I forgot that. The famous penis of Osiris that went missing, and Isis went looking for it. It all goes back to that sort of history, and the epiphallic Atum, I think it is, in Egypt. These things were venerated in those days because they were symbols of fertility, of course. This is how the world works. You don't get any crops, and you don't get any flocks of whatever it is, sheep or herds of animals unless you have this fertility in the land. This was very important in this era.
Exactly. It's nature.
Yeah. And that's why they venerated the phallus. That's why Isis was a symbol of fertility. That's why all of the queens identified themselves with Isis. Because unless you had fertility within the king and the queen being representative of Osiris and Isis, then you wouldn't have any fertility within the nation, within the people.
It's interesting because it's reminding me of Queen Elizabeth I, because her title was the Virgin Queen, wasn't it?
She was indeed. She was following on from these same traditions.
Yeah.
They're fairly ubiquitous, throughout many cultures. They've all followed on from this. And while we're looking at Mary Magdalene and we're looking at Ireland, the traditions of Ireland, we always think that Catholic Ireland was very conservative, would never have anything controversial in Ireland. Well, they did. They had a few controversial things. This was one of them. This was the cathedral at Drogheda, just north of Dublin. So this is a Catholic cathedral, and they've got this carving, fairly well done, because this is 19th century. I think it's not very old. I think it's only a 19th century carving of the Last Supper. Is a copy of the Last Supper scene by Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah, but what's the matter with this one? What is odd about this particular? Well, it's the same oddity that we find in the Leonardo version. We have the same controversy or controversy about who the disciple on the right-hand side of Jesus is. Is that a man or is that a woman?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, to me, let me zoom in a little bit. She even has a little bit of a bust there, I would say.
Yes.
It certainly does, yeah.
Indeed.
That's a woman, isn't it? So this is supposed to be St. John, the disciple. But traditionally, you always get this with these depictions of the Last Supper, where the person on the right-hand side of Jesus, the disciple on the right-hand side, is always Mary Magdalene. And this is an image of Mary Magdalene. And we get this all over. This comes from Finland, as you do, going up to Finland, like I used to do quite a lot. So this is in the old capital of Finland, which now it's Helsinki, but the old capital was, I'll remember in a minute, it was another town. And so this is the Last Supper scene again. And who is on the right-hand side of Jesus? Is that St. John?
Definitely a woman. And
it's definitely a woman.
Is that an apple? A golden apple I see on the table.
Yes, yes, that's very Greek, isn't it? It's got the golden apple.
Interesting, because it's a symbol of Venus, isn't it, as well?
And she is dressed in the standard green and gold or green and orange of Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
So quite obviously, the disciple on the right-hand side of Jesus is Mary Magdalene. And this is an interesting one, because this is the Last Supper scene by I'm forgetting my names today. Napoleon Bonaparte.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, he didn't do it himself. He commissioned it. And this, I understand, is a mosaic. It's not a painting. I think it's a mosaic. So it's been very, very well done. So this, again, comes from the 19th century. And who is on the right-hand side of Jesus? Again, this is an exact copy of the Leonardo. All of the characters are in exactly the same positions with the same hand gestures as in the Leonardo.
She's got hair again as well, hasn't she?
And she's got the green and the gold. They've got it right, the uniform of Mary Magdalene. And she's got the ginger hair. And let's zoom in and have a look. Now, is that a male disciple or a female
That's
disciple?
definitely a
Definitely
female, isn't it?
female.
Yeah.
So this is just confirming what we all knew about the Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper, because this is a direct copy of it. And they have deliberately, and of course this would not be done, I imagine, without the express permission of Napoleon Bonaparte, that they drew the disciple on the right-hand side of Jesus as being a woman, Mary Magdalene. So quite clearly she was very important. She was the high priestess, and she was the wife of Jesus. And so then they have a problem, because they lost the war. Yeah. For information on this, listeners will have to go and look at the previous talks we did, because they had this war against Rome. We won't go into this because it was a very long story, but they lost this war. It was known as the Jewish Revolt, and they lost it. And so from real history, this war was actually prosecuted by Simon Boethus, the father of Mary Boethus, Mary and Martha Boethus. And so they had been, as we were saying before, the richest people in Judea, but they lost this war, and they lost all of their wealth because they lost everything. They put all of their money on black, and it came up red, basically. And the aristocrats and the royalty, they play these games sometimes, and sometimes they win, and sometimes they lose.
That's right.
And so we get this from the
ABBA song. Winner takes it all.
Winner takes it all.
Absolutely. And yeah, the Romans took it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it certainly did.
So we have various references to this in the Talmud. And so if we look at Gittin 56, it says, this is talking about Mary Boethus. She had taken off her shoes, but she said, I will go out and see if I can find anything to eat. Some dung stuck to her foot and she died.
Oh.
This is mockery. I mean, she didn't die, obviously. This is mockery.
I thought that was lucky, Ralph.
No, previously in the same bits about Mary Boethus, it said that she had never walked on the earth because carpets had always been rolled out in front of her because she was so aristocratic and wealthy. She had never actually walked on the ground. And now when she's poor, she's lost all her money, she had to walk out, and she touched a bit of dung with her foot, so she died immediately. It's just standard mockery. And another one from Kethuboth 66. And it says, Rabbi Yohanan. Now, Yohanan was the guy who took over, became virtually the high priest, as it were, of Jerusalem after the Jewish revolt when the Romans were in charge. So Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai left Jerusalem riding upon an ass, imitating Jesus, of course, while his disciples followed him, imitating Jesus, of course. And he saw a girl picking barley grains from among the dung of Arab cattle. As soon as she saw him, she wrapped herself with her hair. She's the Magdalene, of course, she's the hairy one, and stood before him. And she said, Master, feed me. My daughter, he said, who are you? He knows exactly who she is, but, he's having a bit of fun. She replied, I am Mary, the daughter of Boethus Nicodemus. My daughter, he said to her, what has become of the great wealth of your father's house? So now they are in utter poverty. And where do they go to? They go to France. And we get this from the Golden Legend. So we drop here a lot of the previous material you could say is sort of historical, because we're reading from the Talmud, and okay, the Talmud is difficult to read because it's all written in code, but it's sort of semi-historical. But now we drop into the Golden Legend again, which is more sort of it's not entirely historical, so there's a lot more fiction in this, but nevertheless I think it conveys the idea of what happened. So it says that she went to France. So it says there was a time when the apostles sent Maximin, one of the 72 disciples of our Lord, with Mary Magdalene, was committed by St. Peter. When the disciples were departed, St. Maximin, Mary Magdalene, and Lazarus her brother, from the house of Simon, of course, with her sister Martha, all of these together and many others were put in a ship without any tackle or rudder, for to be drowned, and they were cast adrift on the Mediterranean. But by the grace of Almighty God they came to Marseille, where as none would receive them to be lodged, they dwelt and abode under a porch before the temple. So that's what it says, but the traditions from down there, I don't know if you've been down there, is that they came ashore at Saint-Marie de la Mare on the south coast in Provence, which is a delightful place. If you're ever passing through the south of France, go to Saint-Marie de la Mare. It's a nice little sort of coastal town where they still celebrate Mary Magdalene coming ashore. The gypsies of the region all come down and they reenact Mary Magdalene coming ashore at Saint-Marie de la Mare, which is right next to the Rhone Valley. And the Rhone Valley was like the motorway going through France, because you could sail all the way up it. So where did they go to? Well, traditions have it that Mary Magdalene went to Aix-en-Provence, which is sort of slightly towards the east. So you get the cavern of Mary Magdalene and so on, which I don't think is historical, but anyway, people make the pilgrimage to go and see it. And the tomb of Mary Magdalene at Saint-Maxime. Do I have that? I think I have an image of the tomb somewhere. This is the church at Saint-Marie de la Mare, and inside the church there's obviously lots of images of Mary Magdalene and Martha coming ashore in their little ship. And we have an image here somewhere of, this is supposed to be the skull. I can't remember if this is of Martha or Mary Magdalene. I can't remember. It's in one of the churches anyway down there. And this is supposed to be the sarcophagus of Mary Magdalene. But this is just a standard Roman sarcophagus from about the 3rd century. So it's not anything to do with Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that they came ashore and went up to this place. This is Orange in the south of France. This is a classical romantic image, but actually it's in better condition than this. They've rather done it down a little bit. This is what it looks like. There we go. This is the Roman arch at Orange in the south of France. It was a big center of Roman civilization. We're here in the south of France, very rich from the huge, great amphitheaters and everything they had. This is the amphitheater at Orange. Sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I just say it's beautiful.
Yeah, this is the amphitheater at Orange, and this was supposed to be the greatest wall ever made in the Roman Empire, because they said it was so straight and so flat. So this is still in use now. They still use the amphitheater. It's still in use.
Wow.
And when I was there, of course, what did they have? They had a play about Mary Magdalene there.
Oh, wow.
Holding her alabaster jar. Although they've got her in the wrong colours because she was classed as a prostitute, they've dressed her in red, but she should be in green and orange, of course. So yeah, I think they ended up at orange. And we'll go into that. This is orange. This is me looking out over the town of Orange from the hill on the top. And on the top of the hill, there is Mary Magdalene, of course, at the top of the hill. Because Orange has a very strange history. And before we go into that, Martha went up to the next town up, which is bequeathed, which is called Tarascon. And it was called Tarascon because Martha, the sister of Mary, tamed the Tarasque. And this is the Tarasque, the fearsome monster of the Tarasque, from which Tarascon gets its name. And I think basically what they had was a glyptagon, maybe.
Right.
Although glyptagons are supposed to be South American. I don't think anyone's found a glyptagon in Europe, but anyway, it looks very much, it's a big armadillo, basically. I mean, these things are huge. They're like 3 meters long. But I think the Tarasque is something like that. Anyway, so Martha went up to Tarasque, which is just above Orange. That's one of the reasons why I think they went to Orange.
Has it got a Chinese face? It looks like Chinese.
Yeah, I don't know why it's got such a strange face. Yeah.
Interesting.
Orange is an independent principality, was an independent principality for more than 1,000 years. And in the 8th century, the late 8th century, it was run by this guy, who is the Prince of Orange. And of course, he's dressed in the colors of Mary Magdalene. He's dressed in the golden cape. And you might recognize the name of the Prince of Orange, because now all of the monarchs in Holland are called the Prince of Orange. They came from this guy. And he's known as William of Orange, the same name they use today, or Guillaume de Gaulogne, or Guillaume Courtenay is his name. And this was the guy who drove the Muslims out of France. So the first guy that did this was Charles the Hammer, Charles Martel, who chased the Muslims out, because the Muslims invaded all of Spain and half of France, and Charles Martel kicked them out of France. And this guy, because they came back again like 50 years later, and this guy chased them out of France on the second occasion. And his flag is the golden star on a blue background, which of course we still use within the EU. So we get several links between this family, and the symbol of orange is the 3 oranges, of course. As you might think it would be. But I think these are sun symbols. I don't think these are oranges as such, because this was a solar cult, And the cornet is a play on words again, because his name was Courtenay, meaning the hooked nose, because they were Jewish. So this was a Jewish family. And of course, Courtenay sounds like a cornet, doesn't it? So they put a cornet there instead. Playing on words, as they do. And from them, we get the Courtenays. And this is the symbol of the Courtenays of France.
You have to wear sunglasses to look at that, though, don't you?
Yeah. So instead of the 3 oranges, they have the 3 red tarts. And this is of the pie variety, not the streetwalker variety. And why tarts? No one has ever said why the symbol would be 3 red tarts, but I think it's a sun symbol again. And of course, they came over to Britain. And so the Lord of Devon has the same symbol. So this is
interesting.
the Lord of Devon. He's a Courtenay again as well. And so they have the same symbol as the Lord of Devon.
What's interesting,
you
Ralph,
go.
as well, that's just popped into my mind, and it may be nothing, of course, is for a little while they were using the symbol of an orange to denote Donald Trump. And although
Yes, because he sort of has orange skin. Yes, they were always
yes,
taking a mickey out of his orange
it could
skin.
be that, or it could be something else. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I do know that this symbol was also the symbol of Edessa. So this is the coat of arms of Edessa.
Yeah.
Over in eastern Anatolia, the place which seems so central to the gospel texts.
Yes.
And of course, these people were kicked out of Orange. So Orange was an independent principality, and it was always, it wasn't Catholic, it was always sort of Protestant from day one. So it was on the other side of this great battle during the 30 Years' War. And the 30 Years' War is not very well taught in schools today, this war between the Catholics and the Protestant. Obviously, we have Protestantism with Martin Luther, who knocked his, was it 96 theses? I can't remember how many theses he had, onto the doors of Wittenberg Church and started the Protestant Revolution against the corruption of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Well, Orange had always been Protestant. It had been on that side, it had always been independent and independent thinking for all of this time. And it got caught up in this 30 Years' War, and the Huguenots when they were thrown out of France, the Huguenots either went to England or they went to Orange. And so they had all the Huguenots down there. And they were being threatened by Louis XIV, because Louis XIV was Catholic. And they had many, many battles down there. But Orange was saved because Orange also took over Holland. That's why the princes of Holland are known as William of Orange in Holland, because they are related. It's the same family. And at that time, with Louis XIV, when he was threatening Orange down in the south of France, William of Orange from Holland became the King of England. William III.
Yeah.
And so suddenly Louis XIV couldn't do anything about this, and so he had to leave them alone, and they had this big battle with James II in Ireland on the Battle of the Boyne, which was nothing to do with Ireland. This was a European battle between the Protestants and the Catholics. So all that was a big interlude. And then William III, William of Orange of England, died. His horse stumbled on a molehill, which is why the Catholics always celebrate the mole as the gentleman in the velvet suit.
Because it's quite interesting. Sorry, Ralph, it's quite interesting because of that advert. The world is bright, the world is orange.
Yes. Well, yes, and it was, and hence we have the orange celebrations.
Yeah, the orange order, isn't it?
Because eventually Louis XIV kicked them all out of Orange. So he finally got his wish, and he kicked everybody out of Orange, and they all went up into Holland. And that's why we have, of course, the Princes of Orange in Holland even today.
Very interesting.
And somewhere here we can see, because people won't know about the Orange Order, but the Orange Order is very big. And yes, here's an image. So this is the Orange celebrations in Holland. It's a big celebration for the royal family. Hence, they've got the crowns on, the orange crowns. And it's a big family celebration. And they have a lot of fun, and they're all on the canals. This is Orange Day in Holland. And it's really great celebration. And they have exactly the same celebrations in Ireland, of course, because William III of Orange went to Ireland and took Northern Ireland in fact, the whole of Ireland for the British. And so they have the same celebration in Ireland, and here it is in Ireland. There we go. This is Orange Day. So this is Orange Day in Holland, and this is Orange Day in Ireland.
Very interesting, isn't it? I'd like to, while I'm sorry, Ralph, I'd like to thank Carl for his input. There's a lot of very interesting comments he's made today. So thank you.
Okay, yeah. Well, perhaps we can go through some of those at some point. So this is the Orange Order in Northern Ireland, and this is William III, of course, on the banner.
Yeah.
Because he defeated the French army. Again, this was nothing to do with Ireland. It was William III, who was a Dutch king, who happened to be the King of England at the time, was in Ireland on the Battle of the Boyne, who defeated another English king, James II, who had a French army.
Right.
Right. Yes. So this battle had nothing to do with Ireland. This was a great Europe. It was the end of the 30 Years' War, basically, between the Protestants and the Catholics. And the Protestants won, and James II had to flee Ireland and go back to France, where he belonged. And so that's why we had Great Britain, including Ireland, and that's why the British flag, the Union Jack, is composed of the flags of England, Scotland, and Ireland, because it was the union of the three great provinces. It was the Union flag, the Union Jack. So yeah, that's a brief little bit of history of the orange. So I have an idea. Let me just stop the screen share. Back again.
Hello.
I have an idea that Mary Magdalene went to Orange, and that's why this place was different as an independent principality, just as Edessa had been an independent principality in Syria for hundreds of years. So Orange became an independent principality in France for hundreds of years. And it was always different from the Catholic Church. So it was always a more Gnostic, Protestant style, freedom of thought, freedom of expression sort of place. Hence, because the Protestant, again, this is not very well taught within education at present, but from this battle between the Catholic Church and the Protestants, everything we see around us comes from that battle. Every piece of technology you have, everything that makes your life a little bit more simple, all comes from that battle against the Catholic Church. Because from that battle, with the defeat of the Catholic Church and the establishment of the Renaissance and the Age of Reason, we then got, of course, the Industrial Revolution. And that Industrial Revolution, and we got the Royal Society. The Royal Society only arrived at that time and was founded at that time because of the Reformation. The things that the Royal Society were doing at that time would have been totally heretical to the Catholic Church. You would have been burnt at the stake for what they were doing in the Royal Society. But it was from the Royal Society that we got the Industrial Revolution. We got science, we got technology. All of that came out of the Protestant Revolution against the Catholic Church. So everything you see around you today comes from those battles, which is why we ought to celebrate the Reformation much more than we do today. I don't think people realize that if you get an oppressive institution like the Catholic Church in charge, then nothing will progress.
No, exactly.
No,
I was going to say, that's the thing. I mean, people have to be open-minded, and I think to be stuck on some literature that, although it may be inspired, they believe it's inspired word of God, but we have to say at the end of the day, it is written by man and therefore imperfect. And I know maybe some people might not like me saying that, but you have to be open-minded and question things.
Yes, because the interpretation they've put on it, the text may be correct, as we've demonstrated in our past talks. The text itself is 90% correct. It's the interpretation that they've put on it that is incorrect. The Catholic Church has interpreted it very, very literally as being Well, they've put this interpretation upon it of a pauper prince of peace when it was nothing to do with that. It was a warrior monarch from Edessa who tried to take over the Roman Empire. And from that, Rome cast this as a very Rome-friendly pauper prince of peace, because they didn't want any more revolts on the eastern borders of the empire, because they had revolts all the time. They had a revolt in Britain, of course, just at that time in the AD 60s. So the revolt of Boudica and the Iceni was in the early AD 60s, which caused absolute devastation within Roman Britain. And then they had this revolt in Judea, which they were trying to put down. And the last thing they wanted was more of these revolts. And so I think because the oppressive manner that they put down the Iceni, resulting in the destruction of 5 or 6 major cities, Roman cities, in Britain, was a real blow against Rome. And I think when they got to the Judean revolt, they thought it was much easier if they just used this propaganda route in order to reduce tensions in that part of the world. So what they wanted to do was get rid of the messianic revolutionary form of Judaism. So what they wanted was a peaceful, Rome-friendly form of Judaism in order to counter that. And that's exactly what they got with simple Judaism, what we call Christianity. This was a Rome-friendly form of Judaism, which said, pay your Roman taxes, turn the other cheek. It was just what Rome ordered. And I think they thought that this was a much better technique of reducing tensions within Judea and Syria and the eastern borders of the Roman Empire. And that's why they went with this religion.
I mean, I think it would be fair to say, Ralph, that those in power in the Catholic Church know the real truth, and it's the followers who don't. And as you pointed out, it's extremely complicated in many aspects with the allegories and different names and everything. But as your research shows, there are definite pointers to various things, isn't there?
Yeah, there are many examples that point towards this being a propaganda campaign by the Romans. And they have just changed the names slightly. They have changed the locations slightly. But if you read between the lines, you suddenly start seeing that Edessa was the primary site of Nazarene Judaism and then Christianity. And so they've just distorted the story a little bit. Well, they had to, because it had to be. It had to become more Rome friendly, so they had to distort the history to accomplish that. The characters had to be more Rome friendly, so you could not admit that the Jesus character was a warrior monarch, even though if you read the Gospels, he sort of was a little bit of a warrior monarch, because if you remember, Jesus armed all of the disciples, and he said, I don't come here. I'm not placed here on earth. No, I didn't come to bring peace on earth. I came to bring a sword. I will set father against son and mother against daughter, and your foes will be within your own household. That's what Jesus said. That is a call to arms. So that's the conundrum of the gospel story. It's supposed to be a pauper prince of peace, with a book of peace, and yet within it you get all of these little snippets that tell us that this was actually something to do with a revolt against Rome. And that's what it was. That's why Jesus was crucified wearing a purple cloak, because that was the symbol of the emperor of Rome. So he was being crucified as a pretender to the throne of Rome. And that's the real story.
It's quite interesting as well, Ralph, that I don't know whether you want to delve into it a bit, but there is a few sort of links to Freemasonry as well, and I think the very word tecton is quite an interesting one, isn't it?
Yes, because yes, they say that Jesus was a carpenter, but of course he wasn't. He was called a tecton in the Greek, and a tecton is an architect. You can still hear it in the English, architect. Architect means the chief tecton, the chief mason.
Yeah, architect.
And yeah, but in the speculative form. So you have operative architects who actually do stone masonry, and then you have speculative architects who are Freemasons, and an architect in that fashion will be the master mason or the grand master. And I think Jesus was the grand master of the Judean Lodge.
Yeah.
Now, people will say that Freemasonry only started in 1717 with the establishment of Grand Lodge. And remember, Grand Lodge only arrived after the Reformation, and the Royal Society and Grand Lodge, and then we had the Industrial Revolution. They are all linked together because you could not have Grand Lodge under the Catholic Church. And so it could only happen after the Reformation. And that's when Grand Lodge was actually founded. But of course, it came from the Templars, and the Templars got it from first century.
Yeah.
So Jesus, yeah.
Sorry, Ralph. I was looking the other day for that, and I saw the word master mason was used in the 14th century anyway. So it's
yes, but that might have been in the operative sense as a person working in stone. But the two are linked, of course, because everything within masonry has stoneworking symbolism to go with it, of course. I
did notice
square,
it
the compass,
to do with royal connection as well. The Freemason of the royalty. So that was interesting. It was, they were in old books, so it was interesting.
But it's interesting. Sorry,
yes, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting as well that in 1 Samuel 13:19 in the Hebrew verse, the word translated as tecton is charash, and it's used 33 times in the Old Testament and defined as craftsman or artificer. 33.
Yeah, 33 times indeed, yes. Yes, and if you look at the Ethiopian Bible, which is the Kebra Nagast, it overtly says that King Solomon was a Freemason, that he taught the level and he taught the right angle, etc., etc. So, it's overtly saying, because all of this story, Freemasonry, this is why it can be old, not just a recent invention. Freemasonry is talking about the building of the Temple of Solomon. That is what it's all about. So when you go through the third degree, you are supposed to be Hiram Abiff.
Yeah.
Hiram Abiff was the master mason who was building the Temple of Solomon, and he held secrets. This was the whole idea, that these architects held secrets of the universe, not just of building. And he was killed by the 3 Jewes. It's not Jews, it's just Jewes, because that's a play on words of their name. And so he was buried in a shallow grave, and he was discovered after 3 days and then brought back to life again. So when you go through the third degree, you are Hiram Abiff. You die symbolically, obviously, within Lodge, and you are buried in a shroud, and you come back to life again. You are raised. Yeah, you are raised from your tomb by the lion's grip on the third day. But of course, that's exactly what Jesus did to Lazarus at the house of Simon, where Mary and Martha lived. So Lazarus died, and he was in his grave for 3 days or 4 days, I think some say. And he was raised by Jesus, and he came out of the tomb hoodwinked, which is exactly what you do within Masonry today. So the raising of Lazarus in the Gospel of John is a third degree raising. It's exactly the same as any Freemason will go through in the third degree. It's the same ceremony that I went through when I became a Freemason. So yeah, that is why, another reason why Jesus would have been a Freemason.
And it's interesting as well, because that story actually links to the Osiris story again, doesn't it?
Yes, it could do. It may be linked to Osiris, who was also dead and then was resurrected, as it were, by his wife Isis, while they were hunting for his penis, which is another story.
It's a bitter blow, Ralph. It's a bit.
Yeah, that's the only bit they couldn't find.
It's the most important bit, isn't it?
Not in today's world. You instantly become trans in today's world. So yeah, Osiris was the first trans. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, Hiram Abiff. Of course, this goes back into Egypt. So we've not done a story about King Solomon. How long do we have left before they throw us off?
Right. Well, 1 hour 45 we have to finish. So
got another half hour,
yeah.
Ralph.
Another half an hour. Okay. Well, we could very quickly run through a bit of King Solomon, because that's always interesting. We have this story of Hiram Abiff, but we can probably find him within Egyptian history, because I have a feeling that all of these characters can be found within the historical record, because we have the same problem with Solomon as we do with all of the other characters in the Old and New Testaments, because they are missing from the historical record. Yes. And that seems a bit odd. These were supposed to be the most famous and wealthy monarchs in this era. We're talking about the 10th century BC, so 900s BC. And they are missing from the historical record. And I think I have found them in this historical record, because you've only got two options here. Either we're looking in the wrong location, or we're looking in the wrong era.
Yeah.
And I think in this case that we're looking in the wrong location for these people. And they were not in Zion, they were in Zoan. So Zion is Jerusalem, but Zoan is Tanis in the Nile Delta. And I think they were there in the Nile Delta. And let me just quickly try and look up some of my notes on this. Yes, so this has some of it. So what I tried to do was compare the biblical story with Egyptian history. So we had a monarchy supposedly from Jerusalem, Zion, but we had an equivalent monarchy over in Zoan, Tanis in the Nile Delta. And I think that this was the basis of this story. So this is a comparison between these two monarchies. So we have, from biblical history, we have Ezron, and the equivalent in the Egyptian would be Ezram, Ramesses. Then in biblical, we have Ram. In the historical, we have Ramesses again, Ramesses the 10th, Ramesses the 11th. Then we have in the biblical record Aminabdab, which sounds Egyptian anyway, doesn't it? Aminabdab.
Yeah.
And in the historical record, the same, and these are following through in the same order as well with this particular monarchy. Amenazbenebjet, Aminadab, and Amenabjed. Sounds similar. Biblical record, we have Nashon, and in the historical, it's Amenemneshu, Nashon, Neshu. And then we get Salmon. This is a biblical character. He's called Salmon. In the historical record, he's Siamun, Siamun.
Yeah.
And then we get Boaz, the famous Boaz from the Temple of Solomon.
Yeah.
And in the historical record, we get Boaz Orkon, Boaz. And then we get Obed in the Bible, and in the historical record, Amenem Opet. Obed. And that brings us down to the 21st dynasty. And the 21st dynasty of Egypt, who were resident in the Nile Delta. They were resident at Tanis, at Zoan, not Zion. And we have a king there who's Pasiba Kahionit, or Susens, they call him in the Greek. And that, I think, is the King David character. Now, Pasiba Kahionit doesn't sound like David, but an alternative rendition of his same name is Panduat Kahionit. And Duat, of course, is the same name as David within the Old Testament. And the reason I got to this stage with this royal family is because I was looking for the symbolism. Because if you can't find the name, why not go looking for the symbolism?
Yeah.
And I was looking for the symbolism of King David, who was known for his star and his city, the Star of David, the City of David. But there was a pharaoh, this particular pharaoh, Pasiba Kahionit, who was also known for his star and his city, because his name means Pasiba Kahionit, my star rises in my city. So his very name is spelt with the star glyph and the city glyph. And his daughter, interestingly enough, was Makara Mutemhat. Now, the daughter of King David was Makatamar, and his daughter was Makara Mutemhat. Same name, same daughter. Even better, the general, the military general of King David was known as Joab. And the general of this particular pharaoh was called Joabenged.
Right.
Joab and Joab.
Yeah.
It's the same. Better than that, they have the same title as well, because Joab was supposed to be the commander of thousands. And Choab in the Egyptian means 10,000.
Right. It's interesting.
So it sounds the same and it means the same. So, there's a double confirmation that these are the same people. And coming down onto Masonic history, the reason we started talking about this is the architect, the chief architect of King David was Hiram Abiff from Freemasonry. He's called Hiram Abi in the Bible, or Hiram is my father, which is a very poor translation because my father is Ab. So he's Hiram Ab or Hiram Abi. But if you go into Freemasonry, they have a different terminology and they call him Hiram Abiff. But the chief architect of this pharaoh was Hiram Saf or Hiram Atif. Hiram Abiff, Hiram Atif.
Yeah.
And that is nice because it actually tells us what this name is, because we've got no idea what Hiram Abiff really means. It was said to be taken from the king of Tyre, who was called Hiram. But in Egyptian, Herum means, Heru is Horus, means of Horus. And Atif means my father, the same as it does in Hebrew Aramaic. So Hiram Abi means Hiram is my father, and in Egyptian, Herum Atif means Horus is my father. So now we know who his father was. His father was Horus, the god Horus, which is a standard thing within Egypt because they're all the son of some god or other.
Yeah, and of course Horus is another sun symbol as well, isn't it?
Yes, he is. Yeah, he's in the shape of a falcon, but yeah, he is a solar symbol as well. He is a son of God, as it were. And so that is interesting, because that is the basis of Freemasonry, is the design and construction of the Temple of Solomon, David and Solomon, because the temple was started by David, but it was finished by Solomon. So you get both of them there. And we also get some imagery, because if this is true, then all of these characters are in the Egyptian Museum. So somewhere here I've got some images. Let's have a quick look down these. Egypt, Ginger, no, Ice Ages, Solomon. So let's have a quick look at some of these. So if I open up this. Okay, so that is open. So let's do a quick screen share, if I can find where you are. There you are. So I want to present a screen share, and I want a window, that one. Okay, and now you should see a 2 pillars. Now this is interesting because it blends them both together again, because this is Freemasons' Hall in London. This is the Grand Lodge in London on Queen Street, I think it is.
Yeah.
And this is Grand Lodge, and you can see the 2 pillars of the Temple of Solomon are there on the front. So it's all taken from the Temple of Solomon. So you can see where this history goes back into Israel and goes back into Egypt. And it says 17 on the front. I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in. It says 1717 to 1967.
Yeah.
Although that was obviously a centenary of some nature, because this temple, this grand temple, was built in the 1930s. And you can go and visit. So if you're interested in Freemasonry, it's open to the public. And I think you have to book. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but it is open to the public, and you can go around. And inside the Grand Hall is a marvelous set of mosaics, and they really are fantastic. And this, of course, comes from the Temple of Solomon. And so we've got Solomon on the left, the kingly character, and on the right we have Hiram Abiff, who is the hero of Freemasonry, who is the chief architect of King Solomon. This is the guy that was killed and was raised from the dead after 3 days. This is the person that you become during the 3rd degree, when you die and you are resurrected back from the dead, the same as Lazarus was resurrected, the same as Jesus was resurrected. So you've got the 2 pillars of Yakin and Boaz. You've got the Ark of the Covenant down the bottom in between the 2. You've got the ladder leading up to the Yod, which is a symbol of God. It's a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but it's a symbol of God. And you can see the ladder going up to heaven. This is the stairway to heaven, which normally got 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps. Yeah, it's got 7 steps to heaven. So, and
not like a Jacob's ladder, I assume, is it?
Yeah, it's the same as Jacob's ladder. Yeah, 7 steps.
Well, it's interesting. There's 7 steps as well, isn't it? Because you can link that to more esoteric symbolism.
Yes, and you also get the symbolism from the Rolling Stones as well. But as I understand it, their stairway to heaven was a pair of stockings.
Probably more appealing to some.
Yeah, it was a pair of stockings with a ladder in the stockings, you see. Stairway to heaven. This is another one. Yeah, getting back to more serious topics. Again, this is from Grand Lodge. So again, this is Yakin and Boaz, the 2 pillars that stood outside the Temple of Solomon, and they were supposed to be crowned by a globe of the earth and a globe of the cosmos. So it was thought that even in this era, which is 900 odd BC, 950 BC, they understood that the earth was a sphere, and that the cosmos was a sphere as well, if you project the stars out onto that sphere.
Mm.
And of course, here we've got George killing the dragon. And George, again, this goes back into Egyptian history. George, this is the standard battle we've been talking about of Osiris versus, well, actually, no, the son of Osiris. So this is Horus versus Seth. So St. George is Horus. And you will see in Egypt, you will see some images of Horus dressed up as George and the dragon.
You
And
could
the
also.
dragon.
Oh, sorry, Ralph. I was going to say you could also reflect that in the Ra, the sun god, traveling in his solar boat through the day, and then when he goes sunset and he goes into the underworld, he has to battle the great big serpent Apep.
Yes, same story. Yeah.
Mm.
And instead of Apep, this is Seth.
Yeah.
From which, or Set, as he was known in Egypt, from which we get Setan or Satan.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the god of the underworld because Set was of that nature. So it's the same as you're saying with the diurnal circuit of the sun. And of course, the Greeks took that diurnal circuit, and instead of having Ra in a solar boat, they had him in a chariot riding across the skies. And of course, that symbolism we've adopted, and now we have him as Santa. So if you look at the symbolism of Santa in his sleigh with his red cloak being driven across the skies by a team of reindeer, it's exactly the same as the Greek Helios being driven across the skies with his 4-horse chariot.
And it's interesting as well that Santa is an anagram of Satan as well, isn't it? So sorry, any kids watching out there.
Yeah. Sorry, kids, to ruin your day, but
yes, sorry, kids. Yeah, it's all to do with Horus and Ra.
Yeah,
it's all Egyptian.
Ralph, because we were talking about this last week about Santa and how originally he had a green outfit on, as in the Green Man, and Coca-Cola made his outfit red. Apparently.
Well, the Green Man is Osiris anyway, because Osiris is always depicted with green skin.
Yeah.
So, but coming back to what we were talking about, this is Joab. So we were talking about the army commander of King David, and the army commander of this king in Egypt, Basi-Bakayinid, was called Joab in both. In the biblical and the Egyptian version. The army commander was called Joab. This is that man. This is Joab. So if you believe in this conflation I've made between the biblical Joab and the Joab in Egyptian history, this is this guy. He's in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. And this is his death mask. And so we get lots of this. This is Makara Mutamhat. This is the daughter of,
didn't he?
Yes, is the daughter of King David. And here she is again in a colossal statue. This is not quite Tanis. This was in Zagazig, which is in the Nile Delta. And this was just being uncovered while I was there. So this was the first time this. And I don't know what happened to this statue. I've not seen it since. But anyway, she was uncovered in Zagazig. And going back to Freemasonry, of course, we have a lot of Egyptian iconography within Freemasonry. This is the Philadelphia Freemasonic Hall. And as you can see, it's pure Egyptian. Because some Masons recognize that this history did not go back into Israel, in Jerusalem, but went back into Egypt at Tanis. Because the united monarchy of David and Solomon lived in Egypt. They were Paseba Kahayunit and his son Sheshonk. And you're going to have to read this book. Anyone who's wondering how I managed to match these two up. This is my book, Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt. And the cover here has got a death mask, a solid gold death mask. This is the solid gold death mask of King Solomon.
Gosh.
If you compare these two dynasties, these two monarchies, then this will be the death mask of King Solomon. And again, it's in the Cairo Museum. And it makes much more sense of the story, because remember this story of the United Monarchy. These were the most important, most powerful, most wealthy monarchs in this region, in this era. And yet there is no evidence whatsoever for David and Solomon in Israel. It's never been found. No archaeological information has ever been found on these monarchs. And Silberman and Finkelstein, the historians from Israel, the archaeologists, they have done a lot of work, of course, around Israel, around Jerusalem. And they said that Jerusalem in this era, in the 10th century BC, was no more than a village. So there was no united monarchy. It's not there. That's always been the conundrum. They've been looking for David and Solomon for now, well, nearly 100 years, ever since the re-establishment of Israel. And they've had their archaeologists out in the field looking for evidence of these famous monarchs, and they've not found them. Why? Well, because they were here in Egypt.
And interestingly, Ralph, you probably know more than me about this, but I do believe that there is actually an old Cairo, a place called Babylon.
Yes, Cairo was called Babylon a long time ago. It causes a lot of confusion in ancient texts. You're never quite sure which Babylon they're talking about. But yes, Cairo was known as Babylon. But this would explain why you can't find those monarchs, because this, in the Nile Delta, in the Tanis kings, these were the most powerful, influential, and wealthy monarchs in this very same era. So if you're looking for a powerful and wealthy monarchy at this time, the United Monarchy, this is them, because they were the most powerful. And their dynasty happens to imitate the United Monarchy very closely. And I think some people have known this before, because this is a picture of King David. And you see that the artist, I mean, this is 19th century, so it's quite recent, but the artist has dressed King David as an Egyptian pharaoh. I found that rather interesting. But anyway, if this is all true, then this is the sarcophagus of King David.
Wow.
And it's in the Cairo Museum again. And this again is the most wealthy. Never mind Tutankhamun. This is much more wealthy than Tutankhamun. This was made of solid silver. There are only two in solid silver in the whole of Egypt, and this was one of them. And this is the sarcophagus of Pasibekhayanet, who was, in my terms, the King David character.
Yeah.
And the wealth they had within the grave goods or obviously all now in the Cairo Museum, was absolutely fantastic. They had some really, really good, stunning gold and silver artifacts. And yet nobody goes down there. If you go to the Cairo Museum, no, it's moving now. In the old Cairo Museum, you had Tutankhamun down one end of the corridor, and at the other end of the corridor was the Tanite kings, these kings. And there was hordes and hordes of people looking at the Tutankhamun side. You can't even push your way through. Down this end of the corridor, it's empty. And yet these artifacts are actually better, I would say, than anything in the Tutankhamun side. That museum has now moved. As far as I know, they've completed the move now into the new museum. So I don't know how it's laid out in the new museum. But this would be, in this case, the Temple of Solomon. And this is known as the Hetkar Ptah, whereas the Temple of Solomon was known as the Haikal Yahweh. Hetkar, Haikal, between Egyptian and Aramaic, it's the same name, of course. This is the temple of these kings, the Temple of Solomon. And these pillars are all in granite. And of course, these have been usurped. These weren't built for this temple. These are Old Kingdom, and these have been reused at pyramusy, which is avarice, and they've been usurped by Ramesses and various other things. You can see they've been usurped because someone has stuck their cartouche over the design of the capital. They've just carved into it. So we know these pillars have been reused, that these are Old Kingdom pillars. And these are really fantastic, solid granite, pink granite pillars with these wonderful palm leaf capitals on them.
It's really making me want to go back to Egypt now, Ralph.
Yeah, but this is up in Tanis. Not many people go to Tanis. So when I was there, I was the only person there. For 2 days I was there, and I was the only person there.
Wow.
Because not many people go to Tanis, and you need
Right
protection. Yeah.
Tennis tourist ball, Ralph.
Yes.
There's a new career.
Well, yeah, I did a tour last year. I was a guide on the for one group going around Egypt, but we never got up to Tanis because, again, it's difficult to get to. You need protection, so normally you need to get military personnel to guide you up there and so on.
Goodness me. Yeah.
But it's well worth it. I think it's a really great site to go and have a look at it. Tanis, it's really, really good. What else do we have?
If the Egyptian tourist board are listening, we'll have a couple of tickets, please.
Yes. Yeah. Can we have a go? Yes. We'll put Tanis on the map because
exactly.
It's not on the map. This is supposed to be the Temple of Solomon, and of course they've got it in a sort of Greco Roman style with Corinthian columns. I don't think it would have been. It would have been fully Egyptian with Egyptian columns. It would have had columns like this.
Yeah.
And like this. It would have had Egyptian columns, not Greco-Roman. So I think they've got the design wrong here. But nevertheless, it was still a relatively impressive, although small temple. It's nothing like the temples you get down in Egypt, of course. It's quite small. And going back into Freemasonry, because we were talking about Freemasonry, this is the first degree tracing board. So everything is symbolic, of course, within Masonry. I suppose, a long time ago, a lot of people didn't even read, so it had to be symbolic.
Yeah.
And also you can hide things within symbolism.
Yeah.
So these are not Yakin and Boaz, because Yakin and Boaz would have a J or a Y and a B. This is SWB.
Strength, wisdom, beauty.
You've got it, yes.
Yeah.
When did you do your first degree? So these are not the two pillars of the Temple of Solomon, in my estimation, and I'm not sure if I'm unique in saying this, but I said this many years ago, and I haven't found a Masonic confirmation of this. This is the Giza Plateau. So this is the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, and the Third Pyramid. These pillars are representative of pyramids because in Aramaic it's the same word. So they use the word matsiba, which can mean a pillar, but it can also mean a step pyramid or a pyramid as well.
Interesting.
So I think these are representative of the Giza Plateau, because some Freemasons say that the original building project of Hiram Abiff was not the Temple of Solomon, it was the Giza Plateau. So they put Freemasonry way back into ancient Egypt, into the old kingdom of ancient Egypt.
So it'd also be the three magi as well then, as in the stars in Orion's belt.
Yes, the stars in the belt of Orion, because the Giza Plateau was built as the stars of the belt of Orion. So you get the link there as well. And also the two great pillars at Giza were known as the sun. They were identified as the sun and the moon. And of course, that's what we've got here. We've got one identified with the sun,
it's
the other identified.
Absolutely rich with symbolism. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the show, because I could continue talking all evening with you, Ralph.
We could.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Ralph, for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. You're so interesting.
Thanks to Carl as well for his contribution.
Thank you, Carl. And I'd like to say thank you for joining us on the Allens Investigate. You can check us out at www.theallensinvestigate.com and on Facebook, Instagram. We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 F from New Orleans and on Roku. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks
Thank
once
you,
again, Ralph.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you, Allens. Thank you.
Bye.